of us are still digesting the recent unemployment rate numbers, which showed a decrease to 23.3% in the second quarter of this year. Now, conventional wisdom would suggest that the figure should have gone up due to the lockdown. It's all about the official definition of the word employment. I want to talk now to Risenga Maluleke, who is the Statistician-General. Mr. Maluleke, good afternoon to you, and I hope we can clear up a little bit of confusion. First of all, do you see where the confusion comes from?
Jeremy, let me greet you and greet the viewers. The first issue about unemployment and in the definition is because we have never been put in this situation as a country where we have to look at the definition of unemployment. And it's always the case with any system. Until it's stretched to the limits, it never actually tests its stress levels. So in this regards, let me say that I have seen a commentary in the public and listened to members of the public raising and commentators raising this issue. But it's based on what we are following from the National Development Plan as a country. The country tracks unemployment at a narrow definition, and that's our official headline figure. And the ILO, the International Labour Organization, puts guidelines on what we talk to when we talk about unemployment at a narrow definition, which says someone must be actively looking for employment.
So the official figure then shrunk to a record low from 30.1% in the first quarter. That, you would agree, then goes against lived experience. If we were to re-look at that definition, would it be a lot worse?
There are two things that we do as say. Firstly, we cannot re-look at the definition because, one, the issue of definitions, we don't tweak them as we go. We look at methods, and methods can give us any figure. But what we do is we always make available the expanded definition. Even before there was COVID-19 or there was the lockdown, we make available the expanded definition. And when we look at the narrow definition, it tells us that people who actively looked for employment differed from the first quarter. The first quarter, there were 7.1 million of people who looked for employment. In the second quarter, because of COVID-19 and indeed the lockdown, we had only 4.3 million people actively looking for employment. And such 4.3 million people represented 23.3% versus the 30.1% that represented the 7.1 million. But on the expanded definition, unemployment set at 42%, and it represented about 10.3 million people. That is the ones that actively looked for employment, plus the discouraged work seekers, plus those who were seated at home and didn't look for employment, but would have taken up employment had it been available.
Right. So a follow-up question to that then, Mr. Maluleke, is how do you determine who has stopped looking for work, who is discouraged, and who is starting again?
Firstly is when we come to a household, and in this case, we didn't go to households in person, as you will know that we have gone through this discussion previously, Jeremy, where we said we are reaching out to members of the public using telephones. So when we call them and we ask them if they are looking for employment, if they are actively looking for employment, then they form part of the unemployed. But if they say, I have looked for employment and I've been discouraged because all along I've been looking for employment, I can't get employment, then they form part of the discouraged work seeker. And then we come to another category where they say, I'm not looking for employment, but if I get employment, I'll take it. And in this regard, they form part of what we call other not economically active, because the discouraged work seeker is also part of the not economically active. So they form part of other not economically active, but for a different reason. They are not too old or too young. They don't view themselves as too old or too young to work. They are not students. They are not ill. They are just seated at home, as has happened during the COVID-19 lockdown environment. Sure. And indeed, when we asked them, why are you seated at home? They said it's because of the lockdown.
Just finally then, should we be focusing more on the expanded definition then?
if we are to do so, then we have to make changes in the National Development Plan. As you know, that StatSA's job is not to track policy per se, but when there are policy positions like people aged 15 to 64 working, we certainly will measure that. We will bring that up in our measurement. And indeed, in this regard, if we are to bring it to the expanded definition, we then have to say that then the National Development Plan has to make changes. But it would not be wise to make changes because of cases that occur. And of course, we have had cases like this previously, the 2008 global economic meltdown. But to be specific, StatSA always makes the two figures available. So should policymakers choose to look at the expanded definition, it will always be ready because it has always been there since time immemorial.
All right. I'm going to thank you for joining us today, clearing up a lot of confusion that, as you say, has been swirling around since the release of those figures about a week ago. Now,